My guest today is Professor Paul Levinson. Would you tell me a little bit about yourself, Paul?
I wear a lot of hats, likely because I don't have too much hair. But your listeners probably know me most as a singer-songwriter. And my album, Twice Upon a Rhyme, which was released in 1972 and sold a negative number of records, in the last few years, in part thanks to you, Bernie, has developed quite a following. So I'll talk more about that later. But in addition to my music, I'm a science fiction author. In fact, my 1999 mystery science fiction novel, The Silk Code, won the Locus Award for Best First Science Fiction Novel of that year. And it's recently come out in Kindle and Nook, and it's on iTunes. And the same for my 2006 time travel novel, The Plot to Save Socrates. And when I'm not writing science fiction, I'm writing serious, or at least a little more serious, scholarly works. In fact, a lot of my science fiction writers say some of my passages are very learned, and a lot of the people who read my scholarly work say it reads like science fiction, which actually I take as a compliment. But I have a whole bunch of books published, some 15 books. In fact, they've been translated into, about 18 languages, including Chinese. My books have probably sold, in some cases, more copies in China than they have in the United States. In fact, I'm probably better known in China per capita than I am here as a scholarly writer. And getting back to my music, I guess I'm better known in Japan and South Korea than I am here as the singer-songwriter who did Twice Upon a Rhyme, because that album has been consistently for the last 10 years selling better in Japan and South Korea than here in the U.S. So there's music, there's science fiction, there's nonfiction. My newest nonfiction book, by the way, is called New Media, and it's how we have all become producers. We don't have to be a publisher or technical producer to get our material out there into the world. So anyone can put their work up on a blog, anybody can tweet, anyone can put up a YouTube video. And I think that's making a very significant difference in the creative and, for that matter, scholarly works that are available to most people. So that's what my latest nonfiction book, New Media, is about. Then, in addition to all that, I show up from time to time on television. I've been on The O'Reilly Factor, I'm on CNN, I'm on MSNBC. I frequently appear on science fiction documentaries. For example, Evacuate Earth, that was on National Geographic just a few months ago. So one of the places you can see those videos is just search for my name, Paul Levinson, on YouTube, and you'll see about 50 clips from my various video exploits on national television, and for that matter, on the BBC and other places as well.
You also worked with the great Wolfman Jack. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, to understand how I came to meet Wolfman Jack, we have to go back even a little bit further in my life, because about a year and a half before I met Wolfman Jack, I met Murray the K. It's Murray the K on the swinging soiree. Murray the K was a huge disc jockey here in New York. In fact, I first heard him way back in the late 1950s. Murray the K had a show right before the great Alan Freed. And then Murray went on in the 1960s on WOR-FM radio to really sort of launch progressive radio, at least here in New York. There were people doing it in San Francisco as well. But by the end of the 60s, Murray the K had disappeared. And then one fine day in 1972, my then-girlfriend, later wife, and I were listening to the radio, and who did we hear on NBC, WNBC radio, but Murray the K? So I wrote a little article about that. In fact, it was the second article I ever had published in my life. It was published in the Village Voice, And the day after the article was published, I get a call. Murray tracked me down where I was working, and I get a call from Murray the K. It says, "Hey, Paul, Murray the K here. I loved your article about me. How'd you like to come work for me?" Because in the article, I had analyzed Murray's success, and I made some suggestions as to what I thought he should do in the 70s. So I did just that. I came to work as Murray's assistant on his WNBC AM radio show. And the main thing I did was I put together sequences of songs. Murray loved to play songs that were connected to one another. Not just random songs that you hear on AM radio, but the kinds of songs that had common themes that tied them together. For example, I did a set for Murray on Law and Order. That is, songs which by the early 1970s, there were a whole bunch of them, which had to do with someone being chased down by the cops. I fought the law and the law won, or Indiana wants me. Lord, I can't go back there. Or I just gotta get a message to you. That was a great song by the Bee Gees. Anyway, so I put together a whole bunch of those songs. You know, Murray loved that. And here's where Wolfman Jack comes in. One day I was sitting in the studio, and who walks into the studio? Wolfman Jack. And, of course, I recognized him immediately from American Graffiti and the Midnight Special. And shortly after that, Murray left NBC. He went on to another station. But NBC replaced Murray by hiring Wolfman. And one day, the Wolfman called me and said, "Hey, this is the Wolfman," and asked if I'd like to do for him what I had been doing for Murray. So I said, sure, and I put together a whole bunch of sequence music for Wolfman Jack and his NBC AM radio show, Halloween sets, you know, the kind of thing that Wolfman liked. And I did that for about a year, and then Wolfman left, and then I wrote an article about Wolfman Jack. But I got to say, you know, I was just in my early 20s back then, and it was a real thrill working for legends like Murray the K and Wolfman Jack. In their own way, I mean, those two people in my work for them were one of the highlights of my life.
Can you tell my listeners a little bit about the Silk Code?
The Silk Code actually has had an enormous amount of success. It deals with a whole bunch of themes. First of all, it brought into novel form, that is, treatment in a book-length story, a character who had had some success that I wrote, who had appeared in 3 shorter stories, Dr. Phil D'Amato, a New York City forensic detective. I actually named him after a senator in New York, Alphonse D'Amato. And I thought that any time anyone mentioned Alphonse D'Amato's name, that might help sell some copies of my book. But unfortunately, D'Amato lost the next election. But Dr. Phil D'Amato did pretty well. And in the Silk Code, I tied together a whole bunch of things. I used to go with my wife and kids to Amish country in Pennsylvania. That's where the novel begins. And contrary to what people think, by the way, it's not that the Amish say no to all technology. They just don't like central power companies and automobiles, but they have their own very sophisticated technologies. And so the Silk Code explores some of the reasons behind that. And in some ways, the most interesting part of the Silk Code, I think, is the possibility that Neanderthals may still be alive and with us, and that they were much more sophisticated also in their technologies and their science than we give them credit for. There was a recent Nova documentary called Decoding Neanderthals, and many of the themes that were in that PBS special I was first writing about in the Silk Code in the late 1990s. So if anyone is interested in this, you can get a copy of the Silk Code instantly. It's on Amazon, it's on Nook, and my other main science fiction novel, main in terms of attracting the most amount of attention, is a time travel novel called The Plot to Save Socrates. Also did very well. It was reviewed in Entertainment Weekly. You can also get that on Kindle, Nook, iTunes, all over the place.
I know my listeners want to know a little bit about Twice Upon a Rhyme since we play some of the songs. Can you tell us a little bit about Twice Upon a Rhyme?
Twice Upon a Rhyme was a labor of love. Ed Fox and I wrote most of the songs. I wrote in one way or another all the songs. We recorded it in a bunch of studios where we worked out a deal with the studio owners, and the deal was we won't have to pay you anything for the recording session, but we'll give you a cut of whatever money is earned from the album, and in particular from the advance that a record company gives us when we sign the album. Now, as to why Twice Upon a Rhyme didn't succeed back then in 1972. We had tried, Ed and I, for a couple of years. Maybe not a couple of years, maybe 6-7 months. We were pretty impatient. It felt like a couple of years. To get a big label like Atlantic, Columbia, these were places where I had written songs that other artists had recorded and had done pretty well. And so I was hoping with my connections in those companies we could get a deal for Twice Upon a Rhyme. And there was a lot of interest in Twice Upon a Rhyme. But the problem is there wasn't a deal that was forthcoming quickly enough for my impatient younger self. And Ed felt the same way. So we created our own record company, Happy Sad Records. I mean, we were way ahead of our time. Nowadays, people create their own publishing companies and record companies all the time. But we created our own record company. We printed up, I guess about 1,000 or more copies of the album. We had a great cover. People can see that online. Joe Raphael designed that cover, an old friend of mine. Actually, he was a friend of my wife's girlfriend, and we became friends. But that's why I think the album didn't succeed, because although, what's in the grooves of the album speaks or sings for itself, we certainly didn't have the promotional savvy and muscle to get the album out there. And so what happened is the album for many years, although it was reviewed back then in a couple of halfway decent magazines, I think Cashbox had a brief review. Record World had a brief review. I'm not sure if Billboard ever reviewed it. But nonetheless, the album quickly fell into total obscurity. For many years, the only human beings on the planet, more or less, who ever heard it were me, my wife, and our kids. They all liked it, but hey, they were a little biased, I thought. And I was glad about that. But then one day in 2002, we found that a magazine called Record Collectors Magazine, published in Japan, had picked up a copy of the album. I tried to track that down. They bought it, I think they said, in San Francisco in some used record store. So we had sent a couple of albums out there in 1972. One of them somehow wound up in a used record store. And so this got reviewed in this Japanese magazine. They called it a cult classic, a lost cult classic. It was certainly lost. I don't know about it being a classic. But it was a very favorable review. And then one thing led to another. We've sold since then a whole bunch of the original sealed copies of the album. In fact, I still have some for sale. But even more exciting is a company in Seoul, South Korea, called Beatball Records. Actually gave me some money and a contract and put out a CD of the album back in 2009. That in turn was picked up by a Japanese CD distributor. So that's why the album has sold so well in South Korea and Japan. And then a fellow by the name of Anthony Nyland in England contacted me and said, hey, I'd love to put out a remastered vinyl of Twice Upon a Rhyme. And we worked out a deal, and he put it out, and that actually sold out its first printing. And so this past summer, that is the summer of 2012, Anthony said, well, hey, how about we put out another pressing of the remastered vinyl? And I said, sure. So that's available too. You can tell the difference because the two covers are slightly different. You can check that out online. So, the bigger lesson of Twice Upon a Rhyme, and to anyone who's listening, if you're a musician, a songwriter, an author, the key is get the ideas that are in your head, from in your head, out there into the world in some permanent form. And if you do that, anything can happen. Any kind of magic can strike.
Can you tell your fans how they can contact you?
I can be contacted if you want to know more about me, if you want to follow my work in all kinds of ways. So let's see. PaulLevinson.net. That's PaulLevinson.net, N-E-T, has my reviews of current television shows, links to my music, all kinds of stuff. Specifically, my music is at reverbnation.com/Paul Levinson. Again, one word, Paul Levinson, PaulLevinson, reverbnation is one word.com. So you can check that out. And you can find a whole bunch of my books. Just go to Amazon and put in Paul Levinson in quotes, and you'll see all kinds of books, including The So Code, New Media. For that matter, you can also get Twice Upon a Rhyme on Amazon or on iTunes. Just do a search for Paul Levinson in either place under music, and you'll see you can get Twice Upon a Rhyme. In the case of Amazon, either the CD or you can download the MP3, and in the case of iTunes, the MP3. So I hope if you get to listen to my music or read any of my work, you enjoy it.
I really need to thank Paul for doing the interview and sticking with me. We had to do the interview 3 times because I had some equipment problems, and Paul stuck with me and helped me out. Paul's a great guy, great music, and you love his books. And I hope you'll catch him on the Sunday talk shows. And here's a song from Twice Upon a Rhyme.